think you can't really talk about Egypt at the moment without starting really in a similar place to where Mohammed ended, really, and that's the question of repression. I don't know if people saw, but this week, Mahianour El-Masri, human rights lawyer and socialist, has been returned to jail pending trial. A trial that's going to take place on the 30th of September. December. I've gone backwards in time for a moment now. The 30th of December, her and a number of other human rights lawyers, journalists and so on have been accused, amongst other things, of illegal gathering, of thuggery, and of insulting the president, insulting LCC, and are likely to be convicted. I mean, I don't know if people know Mahianour El-Masri. It's the second time she's gone to jail. She was in jail in 2015 for over a year for charges relating to protests which had happened in response to the killing of Khaled Said. A youth killed by the security services in Egypt and so on. And I suppose the case of Mahianour and others going back to jail kind of really highlights the broader question of repression in Egypt, which I think has been really one of the defining features of any discussion since the coup, since July 2013, when LCC and the army overthrew the Muslim Brotherhood and so on. Tens of thousands of people have gone to jail, whether that be protesters, trade unionists, and so on. Something I'll mention later. In mid-September, 8 leaders of the independent union movement in Egypt were arrested. Again, another recent development on the question of repression is the movement, which is, not the movement, sorry, the mass repression that we've seen of LGBT people within Egypt, alongside a horrible reactionary media campaign. I don't know if people have seen police entrapment being used in order to arrest LGBT people, and so on. And then, of course, the continued repression of members of activists within the Muslim Brotherhood. People will, I don't know if people know, years, it's years ago now, where, in the aftermath of the coup, when 1,000 Muslim Brotherhood activists were sentenced to death in a 10-minute trial. This is the picture that we have to draw everything against within Egypt. And why is this? Well, I suppose what is the role of LCC's regime? In two general senses. One was to first of all halt and then smash the revolutionary movement which started in 2011. But then at the same time to continue the liberalisation of the Egyptian economy, which I would argue led to the revolutionary outbreak in 2011. And it might seem like that contradictory aims in a sense, and I suppose that's something that I want to explore, because whilst those aims of smashing the revolutionary movement and liberalising the economy have generally been successful, I suppose the economic pressure, the police brutality, which that has required, has led to, I think, the development of new signs of resistance, of new protest and so on. And in order to do that, what I want to do is I want to just kind of go through the last year or so quickly, highlighting some of the things that have happened, and then talk a little bit about the question of repression, resistance, and what that might mean. And I want to start last December, when LCC signed the deal with the International Monetary Fund for 13 billion 13 billion US dollars. Now, you know, it'll be no surprise to anyone that you can't sign a deal without with the IMF with no strings. And you know, the aim of the International Monetary Fund really was to you know, give El-Sisi enough money to keep the Egyptian economy running enough, really, so that they could, so that, as I said, so they could liberalise the economy. And you see massive cuts to fuel subsidies, you know, a tax on energy, water prices have gone up absolutely tremendously, something like 40%. There was the introduction of a value-added tax. You had the flotation of the Egyptian pound on international stock markets, alongside a whole other ream really of measures. And the impact of those measures really has been to see inflation within Egypt spiral upwards, so that in June it was around 32%, and at the moment it's hovering at around 30%. The cost of living in Egypt has rocketed, and as a result, millions more people, and I think I want to emphasise millions more, have been plunged into poverty, or into deeper poverty. And you know, obviously that can't happen really without their, or at least in general sense, if you do that, then there's likely to be resistance. And you know, you go back to last spring, February, and you saw signs of that starting to develop. So in February, there was a strike of 3,000 workers at the Missa Spinning Works, biggest state-owned factory in Egypt. 3,000 people go on strike over unpaid bonuses, and the strike is repressed by the regime. In March, sorry, I'm going to kind of jump through if people don't mind, if that's okay, and then if people want to raise things in the discussion. Then in March, you have a series of mass protests over bread. The government cuts the number of state-funded loaves that are being given to each bakery from 4,000 to 500 loaves, and you have the eruption of protests. Hundreds of people, led by women, marching in towns up and down Egypt, chanting "We want bread, everything but a loaf," and so on. The cut in bread is made less harsh. And in Alexandria, where the protests were the biggest, the state governor puts extra funding into bread. But I suppose now what I want to talk a little bit about is the focus of some of the articles in the issue that we're launching today, and that is the kind of bout of resistance which started to take place over the summer, which, you know, maybe is drawing a bit to a close at the moment, but which I think has some quite important implications for people looking at the question of revolution in the Middle East and so on. And in order to do that, I wanted to start in July on Warak Island. Warak Island is an island within the city of Cairo. It's about 30,000 inhabitants, where the government announced something like 280 demolitions. Sorry, no, it's larger than that. A number of demolitions on the island, and the security forces arrived on the island and started to demolish homes while people were still living in them, and so on. One person was killed by security forces, and in response, there were protests on the island, which forced the security forces off the island. Now, since then, there has been a little bit of a stalemate in a sense. You know, the island has set up a committee for negotiation, and until about last month, the state was saying that it wasn't going to demolish homes. Last month, they announced that in fact they were going to start threatening to send people to jail, fine people, and so on. Back to August, and back to Mahala El Kubra. where on the 7th of August, a strike of 6,000 workers, again over unpaid bonuses, breaks out. Now, very quickly, that strike escalates. About 16,000 people end up coming out. You know, this is most of the workers in the spinning works, and you see the development of solidarity strikes taking place. 3,000 people at another factory nearby take action, and so on. And there is a mass, and the response is to threaten a lockout, to say to the workers, we will refuse to allow you to come to work. And workers go out onto the streets with their families and organise a demonstration. It's actually a funeral procession for the director of the company. He was still alive, by the way. Quite a statement, I think, from people to march through the streets with a coffin with your name on it. Certainly would frighten me. Has an impact, though. Has an impact. And the threat of a lockout is taken away, and the government offers, the company, alongside local politicians, offers a compromise, a deal. And eventually, after 14 days, the workers choose to take that deal. Now, what's happened since in Mahala is that the state has victimised the key workers who were involved in organising that strike. But I suppose I want to pause really, because I appreciate that I was only really meant to speak for 10 minutes. I'm going to go slightly over, and I'm sorry about that, and talk about some things that are significant about the strike in Mahala. And I want to talk about 2 ways in which the strike is significant. First of all is because of Mahala itself, and I don't mean the area. I mean that historically, Mahala El Kubra and the Misa Spinning Works have played a very important role in the Egyptian labour movement. So, just to give an example of that, in 2006, a mass strike in Mahala spilled over really into an urban insurrection where people marched through the streets chanting for the end of Mubarak's rule and burnt his picture in the square. This was a huge moment, the first time something like that had taken place. And in terms of the strike itself, you know, I think it's important to say that whereas in February, when the strike had taken place, the government had very quickly repressed the dispute, this time round, clearly, the government didn't have the confidence to do that. Now, you know, I don't want to sit here and say, oh, there's a strike in Mahala, therefore there's going to be a revolution, because I think that would be wrong to say. But I think it is important to say that in the context of an Egypt under repression, that strikes can take place, and workers' anger at the cuts that are taking place in Egypt have led to increased confidence, and that workers are taking action, you know, people are protesting and so on. Now, where does that lead? Because, you know, the truth is that life in Egypt is not about to get easier for ordinary people. You know, in the same way that it isn't about to get easier for ordinary people anywhere in the world. And the prospects of more attacks and more repression, you know, I think, leads to the potential of more more resistance. But I suppose in an immediate sense, the question is what can we do now? And I suppose you know, in terms of people like Mahianor, where I started, you know, people should go onto our website. You can find there an email address at the Egyptian embassy. People should send messages of protest and call for Mahianor and the others to be freed. But also, I think people have to take a sense from what's happened in Egypt over the past few months, that, you know, all that is solid can melt into air. Do you know what I mean? The repression that has been imposed by Sisi for years and years is being resisted, and that recently there's been glimpses of ways that workers and Egypt's poor can not only just resist, but can potentially do more. I don't want to overstate it, but I just want to say that the situation, whilst frightening, shows the potential for people to resist, and that's hugely important. Thank you.